Taeyoung's refusal sparks a dangerous battle inside BTS as RM uncovers a secret that could change everything they built together. "You're not going to do this," RM said, his voice cutting through the rehearsal room like a blade. Taeyoung stood perfectly still beneath the white studio lights, one hand gripping the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles had turned pale. Around him, the other members of BTS watched in stunned silence. The music had stopped several minutes ago, but nobody had moved to restart it. Outside the glass walls, staff members pretended not to look inside. Nobody wanted to become part of the argument. Nobody wanted to hear what came next. Taeyoung slowly lifted his eyes toward RM. "I already told them no." RM stared at him. "You told them no without telling us, because I knew what would happen if I told you." A sharp silence fell across the room. Jin folded his arms. J-Hope looked from one member to another, his usual warmth completely gone. Jimin sat near the mirror with his elbows resting on his knees, watching Taeyoung as if he were trying to understand what the younger man had been carrying alone. Jungkook had not spoken once. Suga stood near the sound system, expression unreadable, but his fingers kept tapping against his phone in a slow, nervous rhythm. RM took a step forward. "What exactly did you think would happen?" Taeyoung laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "This," he gestured toward all of them, "this exact room, everyone asking me why I refused, everyone wondering if I've lost my mind, everyone thinking I'm trying to ruin something." "Nobody said you were trying to ruin anything," J-Hope replied. "Not yet," Taeyoung said. His voice was quiet. Somehow that made it worse. RM's jaw tightened. "Then explain it." "I don't owe them my face." "They didn't ask for your face. They asked for your participation. That's not how they described it to me." Taeyoung reached for his phone, unlocked it, and placed it on the table. "They called it a global cultural campaign. They said it would make BTS part of something bigger. They said every major artist was doing it. They said refusing would make us look outdated." Suga finally looked up. "And?" Taeyoung's eyes moved toward him. "And when I asked what the campaign actually stood for, they stopped answering." Nobody spoke. Taeyoung swiped across the screen and turned the phone around. A contract appeared. RM walked closer and read the first page. His expression changed almost immediately. "What is this?" "The part they didn't show you." RM scrolled, his eyes narrowed. "There's a clause here about exclusive public messaging." "Exactly. For 18 months?" "Exactly. And they can approve statements made during the campaign?" "Yes." RM looked up. "Why would anyone agree to that?" Taeyoung gave him a tired smile. "That was my question." Jimin stood slowly. "Who sent this?" Taeyoung hesitated. That hesitation made everyone notice. Jungkook finally spoke. "Hyung." Taeyoung looked at him. "Who sent it?" "The campaign's legal team." "No," Suga said quietly. Everyone turned toward him. "He means who inside our company sent it." Taeyoung lowered his eyes. "A senior executive." Jin's expression hardened. "Name." "I'm not saying it." "Why?" "Because I don't know who else is involved." RM stared at the contract again. "You knew about this before the meeting, for 3 days." RM looked genuinely hurt. 3 days? "Because I wanted to figure it out myself." "You should have come to us." "And say what?" Taeyoung snapped. "That I was afraid? That I didn't trust the people negotiating for us? That I thought someone was trying to make us sign away our voices?" His voice cracked on the final word. He immediately looked away. Jimin stepped toward him. "You could have told me." Taeyoung swallowed. "I almost did." "Why didn't you?" "Because you would have tried to fix it." Jimin frowned. "That's what friends do." "Exactly." Taeyoung's eyes became glassy. "And I didn't want anyone fixing it for me. I wanted to know if I was wrong." RM took a slow breath. "And are you?" Taeyoung looked at him. "I don't know." That answer hurt more than any accusation could have. RM pulled out a chair and sat down. "Then we figure it out together." Taeyoung shook his head. "It's already too late." "Why?" "Because they announced it." Everyone froze. Jin reached for his phone. Within seconds, his face changed. "They did." J-Hope moved closer. "What did they announce?" Jin turned the screen toward them. A major international campaign had listed BTS among its expected flagship partners. Taeyong's name appeared prominently beneath the group name. Jimin whispered, "They announced you without your consent?" Taeyong nodded. "That's why I refused publicly." RM stared at the headline. "And now they're going to make it look like you betrayed the deal." "Probably." "Not probably," Suga said. "They already are." He turned his phone around. Social media posts were spreading rapidly. Some accused Taeyong of arrogance. Others claimed he had become difficult. A few anonymous accounts suggested BTS were divided. J-Hope clenched his fists. "This is happening too fast." "It was prepared," Suga replied. "They knew he would refuse." RM looked at Taeyong. "You said they knew?" Taeyong nodded. "The person who sent me the contract wrote one sentence in the email." "What sentence?" Taeyong stared at the table. "If you refuse, the consequences will not be limited to you." Nobody moved. Jungkook's face hardened. "They threatened the group?" "I think so." RM slowly stood. "Why didn't you tell us that?" Taeyong looked at him directly. "Because I was trying to protect you." RM's expression shifted. "Don't do that." "What?" "Don't decide alone what we can survive." Taeyong opened his mouth, but RM continued. "You think carrying everything yourself is protection. It isn't. Sometimes it's just another way of leaving everyone else outside the door." Taeyong looked wounded. "I know." "Do you?" RM's voice softened, but the anger remained beneath it. "Because I watched you walk into this room ready to let everyone hate you." Taeyong looked down. "I thought it would be easier." "For whom?" Taeyong didn't answer. RM waited. "For whom, Taeyong?" "For me," Taeyong finally whispered. "Because if everyone hated me, I wouldn't have to explain how scared I was." The room became silent again. Jimin covered his mouth briefly, his eyes dropping to the floor. Jungkook turned away toward the window. Jin slowly exhaled. Suga stopped tapping his phone. J-Hope walked over and put a hand on Taeyong's shoulder. "You're allowed to be scared." Taeyong closed his eyes. "I know." "No," J-Hope said. "You know how to say it. I don't think you believe it." Taeyong's shoulders trembled once. He brushed the emotion away before anyone could see more. But Jimin saw it. So did Jungkook. RM returned to the table and picked up the contract. "We're not signing anything tonight. They'll be furious. Let them." "Namjoon!" "No." RM looked around the room. "For once, we're not reacting to someone else's deadline." He held up the contract. "We read everything, we ask questions, we get independent legal advice, then we decide together." Suga agreed. "Agreed." Jin nodded too. "Absolutely." J-Hope said nothing, but his expression answered for him. Jimin moved beside Taeyong. "You should have told us sooner." Taeyong looked at him. "I'm sorry." Jimin shook his head. "I'm not asking for an apology." "Then what?" "Next time, let me be there when you're scared." Taeyong looked away. His lips trembled. "Okay." The meeting might have ended there if the studio door had not suddenly opened. A staff member stood in the doorway, pale and breathless. "Namjoon!" RM turned. "What happened?" The staff member hesitated. "You need to see this." He handed RM a tablet. RM looked at the screen. His expression went blank. "What is it?" Suga asked. RM didn't answer immediately. He turned the tablet around. A leaked internal document was displayed. It contained private negotiation notes, including comments about each member's supposed willingness to participate in the campaign. Beside Taeyong's name was a sentence that made the entire room go cold. "He is emotionally unstable and can be persuaded through pressure involving the group." Jimin's eyes widened. Jungkook stepped closer. "They wrote that about him?" Taeyong stared at the screen without blinking. RM's hand tightened around the tablet. "Who has access to this?" the staff member asked. "Apparently someone who wants it public." Suga took the tablet and scrolled further. "There's more." He stopped. His eyes hardened. "They've been monitoring our private responses." "What does that mean?" Jin asked. It means each member's reaction to the campaign was categorized: supportive, resistant, persuadable. J-Hope's voice dropped. They were profiling us, Tae-young whispered. I told you. RM turned toward him. No, you suspected something. This proves it. Suddenly, another notification appeared, then another, then dozens. The document had begun spreading publicly. Within minutes, reporters were asking questions. Headlines changed. The story was no longer Tae-young rejects global campaign. It had become BTS internal strategy document leaked. RM looked at each member. Nobody posts anything. Jin nodded. Nobody responds, Suga added, and nobody calls the company alone. Jungkook looked at Tae-young. You hear that? Tae-young gave a faint nod. Yes. But then his phone rang. Everyone looked at it. The screen displayed an executive's name. Tae-young didn't answer. The call ended. Seconds later, a message appeared. You have until midnight to correct your statement. Tae-young's face went pale. RM read the message over his shoulder. Correct your statement? Jimin asked. What did you say publicly?
Tae-hoon opened the statement he had released earlier. It was only 2 sentences. He had said that he appreciated the opportunity, but could not participate in a campaign whose values and conditions did not align with his personal principles. Nothing more. RM nodded slowly. There is nothing wrong with this. Another message appeared. If you do not cooperate, the leaked document will be followed by additional materials. Jungkook's eyes narrowed. Additional materials? Suga took the phone. They're threatening a second leak. What materials? Jin asked. We don't know. Tae-hoon suddenly sat down. I do. Everyone turned. What? Tae-hoon looked at them, his face drained of color. There was another folder. RM stepped closer. Where? I saw it on the server when they sent me the contract. What was in it? Tae-hoon swallowed. Personal communications. Jimin's face tightened. Ours? Yes. How personal? Tae-hoon looked at him. Private messages, emails, meeting recordings. Jungkook cursed under his breath. They recorded meetings? Apparently. RM stood completely still. Why would they collect all of that? Suga answered before Tae-hoon could. Leverage. The words seemed to suck the warmth out of the room. RM looked at Tae-hoon. Did you copy anything? No. Did you photograph it? No. Then how do you know? Because the folder was open. Tae-hoon's voice became quieter, and I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. What? Tae-hoon looked at Jungkook. For several seconds he said nothing. Jungkook frowned. Why are you looking at me? Because your name was there. The room froze. My name? Yes. Jungkook stepped forward. What did it say? Tae-hoon shook his head. I couldn't read everything. What did you read? Enough to know they were planning something. For me? I don't know. Jungkook's breathing became heavier. Then tell me what you know. Tae-hoon stood. It said they expected you to be the easiest person to isolate. Jimin immediately stepped between them. Stop. Jungkook looked furious. Why would they isolate me? Because you're young enough to be pressured, successful enough to be valuable, and loyal enough to protect the group even when it hurts you. Jungkook stared at Tae-hoon. You knew this for 3 days? Yes. And you said nothing? I was trying to find out more. By yourself? Yes. Jungkook laughed bitterly. You keep saying you're protecting us, but you're making decisions about our lives without us. Tae-hoon flinched. I know. Do you? Jungkook's eyes were wet now. Because I'm tired of being protected by people who don't trust me enough to tell me the truth. Tae-hoon couldn't answer. Jimin touched Jungkook's arm. He was scared. So was I. Jungkook looked at Tae-hoon. I just didn't know I was supposed to be scared of the people around us. That sentence broke something in the room. RM closed his eyes briefly.
When he opened them, his voice was calm. "We leave." Jin looked at him. "Now?" "Yes." "Where?" "Somewhere nobody expects." Suga understood immediately. The old practice house. RM nodded. No staff, no managers, no executives, just us. J-Hope looked toward the hallway. "And if someone follows? Then we find out how much they already know." They left through a side entrance one by one. The rain had started outside, fine and cold, turning the pavement into black glass. Taehoon walked last. Before getting into the van, he stopped and looked back at the building. The bright windows reflected his face back at him. For a moment, he looked like someone watching his own life from far away. Jimin opened the door. "Come on." Taehoon climbed inside. The van pulled away. Nobody spoke for many minutes. Seoul passed outside in streaks of white and red. Jungkook sat by the window, headphones around his neck but no music playing. Jin stared at his phone without touching it. J-Hope kept rubbing his thumb over the edge of his sleeve. Sugar watched the road. RM sat across from Taehoon. Eventually, Taehoon whispered, "I'm sorry." RM shook his head. "Stop apologizing for being afraid." "Then what should I do?" "Tell us everything." Taehoon looked at him. "Even if it makes things worse?" "Especially then." Taehoon took a long breath. "There was one more thing." Everyone looked at him. "The campaign wasn't really about us." Suga raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "I asked why they wanted BTS specifically. And?" "They said because our public influence could normalize the campaign faster than traditional advertising." J-Hope frowned. "Normalize what?" Taehoon looked out the window. "A corporate restructuring." RM's expression sharpened. "Whose?" Taehoon hesitated. "Several international partners." Suga leaned forward. "That's not enough." "I know." "What were they trying to normalize?" Taehoon finally looked back at them. A new model where artists would become contractual ambassadors, not only for products, but for corporate policy. Nobody spoke.
"That's why I refused," Taeyong continued, "because they wanted us to endorse decisions we had no control over." RM slowly nodded. "So the campaign was a test." "Yes, a test of whether we would lend our credibility to something without asking questions." "Yes." Jimin whispered, "And you were the first one to say no." Taeyong looked down. "Apparently." The van fell silent again. This time the silence felt different. It was no longer suspicion. It was recognition. They were beginning to see the size of the problem. When they reached the old practice house, the rain had become heavier. They entered through the back door and switched on only the kitchen light. The room smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. It felt smaller than Taeyong remembered, more human. Jin immediately began making tea, a habit he had developed whenever tension became unbearable. Suga sat on the floor with his back against the cabinet. J-Hope opened the curtains slightly and checked the street. RM placed all the phones on the table. Nobody keeps a device in a pocket. Jungkook stared at him. "You think our phones are compromised?" "I think tonight taught us not to assume anything." They sat in a circle. Taeyong looked at each face. These were the people he had spent years beside, people who had seen him exhausted, angry, ridiculous, brilliant, frightened. Yet tonight he felt like he was meeting them again. "I don't want this to destroy us," he said. RM answered immediately. "It won't." "You can't know that." "No." RM smiled faintly. "But I know us." Jimin reached across the table and placed his hand beside Taeyong's. He didn't touch him. He simply left it there. After a moment, Taeyong placed his own hand next to it. Jungkook watched them. Then he moved his hand into the middle. One by one, the others followed. No dramatic speech came, no promise that everything would be easy. Only the quiet warmth of 7 hands meeting in the center of an old table while rain struck the windows. Later, after midnight, they finally received the first official response from the company.
It stated that the leaked documents were incomplete, that Taehyung's refusal was a personal decision, and that BTS remained united. RM read the statement twice. They used the word united. Suga nodded. Because that's what they're afraid of. What? J-Hope asked. Suga looked at the seven of them. Us making decisions together. Taehyung leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. For the first time in 3 days, his shoulders began to loosen. Nothing had been solved. The threats were still there. The leaked documents were still circulating. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more headlines, more pressure. But tonight, nobody was alone. Jimin quietly placed a blanket over Taehyung's shoulders when he noticed him shivering. Taehyung opened his eyes and smiled. Thanks. Sleep. I can't. Then rest. Across the room, Jungkook looked at him. Their eyes met. The anger between them had not completely disappeared, but something gentler had begun to replace it. Jungkook nodded once. Taehyung nodded back. RM turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the soft glow from the hallway. Outside, the rain continued to fall over the sleeping city. Inside the old house, 7 exhausted men remained together, not because the world had become safer, but because they had finally stopped trying to face its dangers separately. And in that quiet, Taehyung understood something he had forgotten. Sometimes courage was not standing alone when everyone else was afraid. Sometimes courage was finally allowing the people you loved to stand beside you.
A leaked recording tears BTS apart as Taehyung discovers who betrayed their trust, forcing 7 members to choose between silence and truth. Turn it off, Jungkook. Jungkook froze with his hand hovering over the laptop. The voice coming through the speakers was unmistakably Taehyung's, but the recording was not from the old practice house. It was from a meeting none of them remembered agreeing to record. The room went dead silent. Rain hammered against the windows of the old practice house, but nobody seemed to hear it anymore. On the laptop screen, a timestamp glowed in the corner. 3 days earlier, 2:13, Taehyung stared at the screen as if he had been punched. That isn't me. Suga leaned forward. It is your voice. I know my voice. Then explain it. Taehyung's eyes remained fixed on the screen. I can't. RM reached toward the keyboard and paused. Play it again. Taehyung immediately turned toward him. No. RM looked at him. Why? Because I know what comes next. Jungkook slowly closed the laptop. Then tell us. Taehyung stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. I said I don't know. You clearly know something, Suga said. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. You recognized the recording before 30 seconds, because I remember that night. You said you never attended a meeting about this campaign after receiving the contract. I didn't. Then where were you? Taehyung's jaw tightened. At the studio, Jimin stood. Which studio? Taehyung looked at him. The private one. Alone? Yes. For how long? I don't remember. Jungkook laughed bitterly. That's convenient. Taehyung's face changed. Don't what? Don't talk to me like I'm lying. Then stop giving us answers that sound like lies, Jungkook shouted. The words struck the room harder than the thunder outside. Jin immediately stood between them. Enough. Jungkook looked furious. No, Haeyoung. Not enough. We keep finding things. First the contract, then the internal document, now a recording of Taehyung talking about something he says he never discussed. How much more are we supposed to discover by accident? Taehyung's eyes flashed. You think I wanted any of this? I think you keep deciding what we deserve to know. Because every time I tell you something, somebody gets hurt. We're already hurt. Jungkook's voice cracked. Do you understand that? Taehyung went silent. Jungkook stepped closer. I spent 3 days thinking you were protecting us. Now I don't know if you're protecting us or protecting someone else. Jimin grabbed Jungkook's arm. Stop. Jungkook pulled away. Why should I? Because you're angry. I'm allowed to be angry. Yes, Jimin said quietly, but don't say something you can't take back. Jungkook looked at Taehyung again. For a moment neither moved. Then Taehyung whispered, he's right. Everyone turned toward him. What? RM asked. Taehyung's eyes filled with tears, but his voice remained steady. He's right to question me. Jungkook looked startled. Taehyung. No, let him. Taehyung swallowed. I haven't told you everything. Suga leaned back against the wall. There it is. Taehyung looked at him. What? The sentence we've been waiting for. I didn't want this. Nobody does. You don't understand. Then make us understand. Taehyung walked toward the window. His reflection floated over the dark glass. The night in that recording happened before I received the contract. RM frowned. Then what meeting was it? I don't know. You were there. Yes, so you know. I remember walking into a room. Taehyung pressed his fingers against the window. I remember someone asking me to sit down. I remember coffee. I remember a projector. And then I remember nothing for almost an hour. Nobody spoke. Jin's expression changed. What do you mean you remember nothing? I don't know what happened during that hour. Suga stood. Did you drink coffee, alcohol? No. Medication? Taehyung shook his head. Nothing. RM's face hardened. Then why is there a recording? Taehyung slowly turned. Because somebody wanted me to believe I had agreed to something. J-Hope whispered, what? Taehyung looked at the laptop. Listen to the final 30 seconds. RM opened it again. The recording continued. Taehyung's recorded voice sounded exhausted. If the group refuses, then use me first. They'll follow. Jungkook's face drained of color. You said that? Taehyung shook his head. I would never say that. Suga listened carefully. The voice is yours. I know. The cadence is yours. I know. Then someone edited it. That's what I think. RM stared at the waveform on the screen. But editing a voice this cleanly would require access to high-quality source material. Exactly. Taehyung looked at him. Which means whoever made this had access to recordings of me speaking privately. Jin's eyes narrowed. How private? Private enough. Jimin slowly sat down. This is getting worse. It gets worse, Taehyung whispered. What? RM asked. Taehyung hesitated. The recording isn't the only fake. Suga's expression sharpened. What else? Taehyung took out his phone and opened a folder. I found these yesterday. He placed several screenshots on the table. They showed messages apparently written by him, agreeing to the campaign, discussing strategies, even suggesting that the other members would eventually accept it. Jungkook stared. I never saw these, because I never sent them. RM picked up the phone. Who received them? A journalist. How do you know? Because the journalist contacted me. J-Hope looked stunned. And what did they say? They asked why I was denying messages I supposedly sent. Jin's expression hardened. Did you answer? No. Why? Because I couldn't prove they were fake. Suga took the phone. Metadata? Gone. Screenshots can be manipulated. I know. Then this is deliberate, RM nodded. Someone is manufacturing a narrative. Jungkook leaned against the table. Why? Because they need us to fight, Suga answered. If we're fighting, we stop investigating. Jimin looked toward Taehyung. And if we stop investigating, then the campaign becomes the story. RM walked to the other side of the room. No. Everyone looked at him. We're not letting that happen. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the room. Then what do we do? Jin asked. RM turned around. We find the original source. Suga nodded. We need someone outside the company. A lawyer? J-Hope asked. More than that. Suga looked at the laptop. A forensic investigator. Jungkook frowned. Can we trust one? No. Suga looked at him. That's why we choose someone with no relationship to the company. Taehyung lowered his head. I know someone. RM immediately asked, who? A former digital forensic analyst. Former, he left the industry. Why? Taehyung's silence lasted too long. Suga noticed. Why? Because he exposed something once. And he was threatened. Jin sighed. Of course he was. His name is Minseok. RM frowned. Would he help? I don't know. Call him. Taehyung looked at his phone. Now. Taehyung hesitated. If he's being watched, then we shouldn't use your phone. Suga picked up an old landline handset. This house still has a line. Jin looked surprised. Apparently. Good. Taehyung stared at the phone for several seconds before dialing from memory. The call rang 4 times, then a man answered. Who is this? Taehyung closed his eyes. It's me. Silence. Taehyung. Yes. Why are you calling this number? Because I need your help. The man's voice became colder. No, you haven't heard the problem. I know enough. Someone is fabricating recordings. Silence. How do you know? Because one of them is my voice. That's not enough. They also forged messages. Another silence. How many? At least 6. And the campaign? Taehyung's eyes widened. How do you know about that? Because I was contacted 6 months ago. RM looked at him. By whom? Taehyung repeated the question. By people asking me to build a system capable of generating synthetic communications. Suga's eyes sharpened. Synthetic communications. Minseok continued through the phone. Voice, text, video, they wanted something that could make an artist appear to say almost anything. The room became suffocatingly quiet. "Did you build it?" Taehyung asked. "No. Who did? That's why I left." RM stepped closer to the handset. "Minseok, this is Namjoon." The man went silent. "I need you to listen carefully," RM continued. "If what you're saying is connected to our situation, we need evidence. Evidence can get you hurt. We're already being threatened." "Then you don't understand the scale. Explain it." Minseok exhaled. "The campaign is not the objective." RM's eyes narrowed. "Then what is?" "Control of narrative. That's vague. It has to be." "Why?" "Because if I say too much over a phone line, whoever is listening will know what I know." Suga whispered. "He's being monitored." Minseok heard him. "Yes." "Then how do we meet?" Jimin asked. "You don't." Taehyung frowned. "What? Not yet." "Minseok, listen to me. Someone inside your organization is helping them." RM stiffened. "We know." "No, you suspect." "Then tell us who." "I can't." "Why?" "Because I don't know." Suga's eyes narrowed. "But you know it's someone inside." "Yes." "How?" "Because the system could not work without internal access." Jungkook looked toward the others. "What kind of access?" "Scheduling, private recordings, communication archives, contract drafts, security logs." Jin's expression hardened. "That's almost everything." "Exactly. Then how do we find them?" "You don't look for the person." "What?" "You look for the access pattern." Suga immediately understood. "Find what accounts touch the files." "Yes. But the company controls the servers." "Then don't use their servers." "Where do we get the originals?" "You need your own copies." Taehyung looked at the laptop. "We have some." "Then preserve them immediately." "How?" "Do not open or modify them further." Suga nodded. "Understood." Minseok's voice softened. "Taehyung." "Yes. If they contacted you first, it means they thought you were the weakest link." Taehyung looked down. "I know." "No, you don't." "What do you mean?" "They don't choose the weakest person." Taehyung waited. "They choose the person who still has a conscience." The call ended. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Jungkook sat down. "That was creepy." Jin nodded. "Very." RM looked at Taehyung. "Did you know about the system?" "No." "Did you know they had this kind of technology?" "No." "Then stop blaming yourself for knowing things you couldn't possibly know." Taehyung smiled faintly. "You're becoming very good at giving orders." RM raised an eyebrow. "Someone has to." Suga suddenly froze. "Wait." Everyone looked at him. "What?" He pointed at the laptop. "Play the recording from the beginning." RM did. Suga listened with his eyes closed. The meeting started. Taehyung's recorded voice spoke, then another voice, a man. Suga immediately raised his hand. "Pause." RM paused. "Who is that?" J-Hope asked. "I don't know." Suga rewound. "Listen." The voice said, "You understand what happens if you refuse." Taehyung's recorded voice answered, "I'm not afraid of consequences." Suga's eyes opened. "That voice." Jin frowned. "You recognize it, not the voice itself." He looked toward RM. "The phrasing." "What about it?" "I've heard it in internal meetings." "Whose?" Suga didn't answer immediately. "Someone close enough to us that I never questioned why he was there." RM's face tightened. "Name?" "I want to be sure." Jungkook stood. "We're past being sure." Suga looked at him. "And that's exactly how people get manipulated." Jungkook stared back. "Then what do you suggest?" "We create a trap." RM slowly nodded. "A controlled leak." Jimin understood immediately. "Give different information to different people." "Exactly." Jin's eyes widened. "Then see which version appears outside." J-Hope shook his head. "That's dangerous." "Yes," Suga said, "but if someone inside is feeding information to outsiders, we need to identify the channel." Taehyung looked uneasy. "What if they retaliate?" RM answered. "They already are." "What if the person is someone we trust?" Nobody answered. That was the question that frightened them most. They spent the next several hours designing 3 separate pieces of information. None of them involved anything truly damaging. One suggested a private rehearsal in Busan. Another suggested that Taehyung planned to withdraw from the campaign permanently. The third suggested that Jungkook had been offered a separate international contract. Each version was given to a different trusted contact. Nobody else knew which version went where. By sunrise, the rain had stopped. The city outside looked washed clean, but the members knew better. They were standing inside something that could not be cleaned by rain. Around 7 in the morning, Jin made breakfast. Nobody had slept. Jungkook ate silently. Jimin poured coffee. Taehyung sat at the table staring at the same piece of toast for nearly 10 minutes. "Eat," Jin said. "I'm not hungry." That wasn't a question. Taehyung smiled faintly. You sound like my mother. Your mother has excellent instincts. Taehyung finally took a bite. J-Hope watched him. You know what's strange? What? We're all exhausted, but I feel clearer than I have in days. Suga looked up. Because we finally know what we're fighting. RM shook his head. We don't know who we're fighting. That's the problem. Jimin looked toward the window. Maybe we shouldn't think of it as fighting someone. Everyone looked at him. What then? Jimin asked. Finding the truth. Jungkook smiled sadly. That sounds less dramatic. Maybe we need less drama, Jin laughed softly. We're BTS, drama finds us. Everyone laughed for the first time in hours. It was brief, but it mattered. Then the laptop chimed. Suga checked the screen. His expression changed. We have something. RM stood. What? Suga turned the laptop around. A news site had just published a report. The article claimed that Jungkook had been secretly considering an independent international contract. Jungkook's face went blank. That's the version I gave too. He stopped. Suga looked at him. Who? Jungkook named the contact. Suga nodded slowly. That's our leak. RM's expression hardened. Who gave them the information? We know where it originated. Suga pulled up another screen. But that's not all. He showed them the article's metadata. The information wasn't simply passed to the journalist. It was packaged with internal documents. Jimin frowned. Meaning? Someone with internal access supplied the supporting files. RM stared at the screen. So our contact wasn't the source. No, Suga said. They were the root. Jungkook looked angry. Then the person inside the company knew which version to push. Exactly. Taehyung whispered. How? Suga zoomed in. Because each version contained a unique phrase. And the published article contains the exact phrase from Jungkook's version. RM leaned closer. Which means whoever accessed the internal system also had access to the trap. Or, Suga said, someone is watching us directly. Everyone became still. The possibility hung over them like smoke. Jin looked around the house. You mean someone could have followed us? J-Hope checked the curtains. We came here without telling anyone. Someone knew, Suga said, or guessed. Jungkook's phone suddenly vibrated. Everyone stared at it. He hadn't touched it. The screen lit up with an unknown message. Stop searching. Jungkook looked at RM. What do I do? Nothing. Another message appeared. The next leak will be personal. Jimin's face changed. Don't open it. Jungkook stared at the screen. A third message appeared. We warned you. Suga immediately said, turn it off. Jungkook obeyed, but the damage had already been done. Everyone understood that the threat was no longer theoretical. Someone was watching. Someone knew what they were doing. Someone knew they were together. RM walked toward the door and looked outside. The street was empty. Nobody leaves alone, he said. Taehyung stood. Namjoon, what? There's something you need to know. RM turned. What? Taehyung looked at the others. The folder I saw at the company wasn't just labeled with Jungkook's name. Suga's expression tightened. What else? There was another folder. Whose? Taehyung's eyes moved toward Jimin. Jimin stopped breathing for a moment. Mine, Taehyung nodded. Jimin's voice became barely audible. What's in it? I don't know. You saw it. Yes. Then why didn't you tell me? Taehyung looked ashamed. Because the label said something I couldn't understand. What? Taehyung swallowed. Behavioral vulnerability assessment. Jimin stared at him. What does that mean? Suga answered quietly. It means someone has been studying how you react under pressure. Jimin's eyes hardened. Why me? Taehyung didn't answer. Jimin stepped closer. Why me, Taehyung? Because they think you're the emotional center of the group. Jimin laughed once, but his eyes were wet. So they think if they hurt me, everyone else will break. Yes. Jimin looked at the floor. That's disgusting. I know. No, Jimin said. You don't. He looked up. You saw my name in that folder 3 days ago and still didn't tell me. Taehyung closed his eyes. I was afraid. You keep saying that, because it's true. Jimin stepped closer. Then stop being afraid alone. Taehyung looked at him. Jimin's anger softened. I'm not asking you to protect me. He touched Taehyung's shoulder. I'm asking you to trust me enough to let me face it. Taehyung's eyes filled. I'm sorry. Jimin shook his head. I know. Then Jimin pulled him into a brief embrace. Taehyung stood stiffly for a moment before his arms slowly wrapped around Jimin. Jungkook looked away, giving them privacy. RM watched quietly. He knew the group had crossed another invisible line. Fear had stopped dividing them. It was becoming the thing that forced them to stand closer. But there was still one question. Who had started it? By afternoon, they received another message from the company. A formal meeting had been scheduled. All 7 members were expected to attend. The message warned that continued refusal to cooperate could have serious contractual implications. RM read it twice. They want us back in the building, Suga nodded, because they're losing control. Jin looked at Taehyung. Are you ready? Taehyung breathed slowly. No, J-Hope smiled faintly. Good. Taehyung looked confused. Why is that good? Because none of us should be ready for something like this. RM picked up his coat. We go together, Jungkook stood, and we record everything ourselves. Suga nodded. Yes. Jimin took a breath. What if they demand Taehyung apologize? RM looked at him. Then we listen. And if they threaten him, then we leave. And if they threaten all of us, RM's eyes hardened. Then they finally reveal what they really want. The 7 of them left the old house together. The afternoon sky was gray, but the rain had stopped. They walked into the company building through the main entrance this time. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Taehyung, did you reject the campaign? Is BTS divided? Jungkook, are you leaving? Jimin, what do you think about the leaked documents? Nobody answered. They entered the elevator. The doors closed. 7 reflections appeared in the mirrored walls. Nobody spoke until the elevator reached the executive floor. The doors opened. An executive was waiting. His smile was calm, too calm. Thank you for coming. RM looked at him. We didn't come to negotiate. The man's smile faded slightly. Then why are you here? To listen. To what? RM stepped forward. To what you think you're entitled to control. The executive's eyes moved from RM to Taehyung. This is about your refusal. Taehyung said nothing. You understand the consequences. We've heard that phrase before, Suga said. We'd like to know what it means. The executive's expression tightened. It means contracts can be complicated. Jin smiled without warmth. So can people. The meeting room doors opened. They entered together. A long table waited beneath bright lights. Documents had already been placed in front of every member. Taehyung sat last. He looked down at the papers. There was a revised campaign agreement. His name was highlighted. RM picked up the first page. You want him to sign individually? Yes. Why? Because his refusal is personal. Taehyung finally spoke. No, my refusal is ethical. The executive leaned back. You are making this unnecessarily dramatic. Taehyung looked directly at him. You recorded me without my knowledge. The man's face remained still. That's an accusation. And you leaked private documents. Another accusation. And someone forged my messages. We have no evidence. Suga smiled coldly. That's why we're here. The executive's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Suga placed a small drive on the table. We have copies. Copies of what? Everything. The room went silent. RM watched the executive carefully. A tiny movement appeared in the man's jaw, almost invisible, but Suga saw it. So did RM. Taehyung saw it too. The executive reached for the drive. RM moved faster and pulled it away. Don't. It's company property. No, RM replied. It's evidence. The executive stood. You are crossing a line. RM stood too. You crossed it first. The tension became unbearable. Jimin's hands trembled beneath the table, but he kept them clasped. Jungkook watched the door. Jin stared at the executive. J-Hope remained completely still. Suga's eyes never left the man's face. Finally, the executive said, You don't understand what happens if you continue. RM answered, Then tell us. The executive stared at him. You want the truth? Yes. Fine. He leaned forward. The truth is that the industry doesn't belong to artists anymore. Nobody moved. It belongs to whoever controls distribution, data, contracts, and public perception. You think you can simply refuse because you're BTS? Taehyung's voice was quiet. Yes, the executive laughed. That arrogance will destroy you. Taehyung looked at him. Maybe, he paused. But if success requires me to become someone else's mouthpiece, then maybe losing it isn't the worst thing that could happen. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. Jungkook looked down. RM smiled faintly. That's why we're here. The executive's expression hardened. You think the public will stand with you? Suga answered. We don't know. Then why risk it? Suga looked around the table. Because if we stay silent, someone else gets to define what we believe. The executive slammed his hand onto the table. Enough, the sound echoed through the room. You have no idea what you're challenging. RM didn't flinch. Then show us. The executive stared at him for a long moment. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed, not anger, fear. He stepped away to answer. "Hello?" Nobody could hear the voice on the other end, but they could see the executive's posture change. "No, they're here." A pause. "I understand." Another pause. "Yes." He hung up. RM watched him carefully. "Who was that?" The executive said nothing. Suga stood. "Who was that?" "A private matter." "You look terrified." "Sit down." Suga didn't move. "Who was it?" The executive's eyes moved toward Taehyung, then toward Jimin, then Jungkook. "Someone you don't want to meet." The door suddenly opened. Everyone turned. A security officer entered with a sealed envelope. He handed it to the executive. The executive opened it. His face went pale. He slowly placed a photograph on the table. RM looked down. It was a photograph of all 7 members leaving the old practice house that morning, taken from across the street. Nobody spoke. Jungkook's breathing became shallow. Jimin covered his mouth. Taehyung stared at the photograph. "They were watching us." Suga's voice was ice cold. "Yes." RM looked at the executive. "Did you order this?" The executive shook his head. "No." "Then who did?" "I don't know." For the first time his voice sounded genuinely frightened. Suga stared at him. "You really don't know?" The executive shook his head again. "No." RM looked at the photograph. "Then we're not the only ones being threatened." The executive sat slowly. His hands trembled. "You don't understand." "Then explain." "I thought I was managing a campaign." "What is it?" The executive looked toward the closed door. "It's bigger than the company." Nobody spoke. "There are people above us," he continued, "people who don't care about artists, contracts, or brands." Taehyung whispered. "Then what do they care about?" The executive looked at him. "Influence." The room fell silent. "They want to prove that public trust can be bought," he said. "And BTS is the largest test they have." Jimin's eyes hardened. "We're an experiment. That's what it looks like." RM stood. "Who are they?" The executive shook his head. "I don't know. You expect us to believe that. Believe whatever you want." He looked exhausted now. "But get out while you still can." RM stared at him. "You don't get to threaten us and then tell us to run." "I'm not threatening you." The executive's voice cracked. "I'm warning you." Suga picked up the photograph. "Then start talking." "I don't know names." "Organizations. Some. Give us one." The executive hesitated. Then he whispered a name none of them recognized. Suga immediately wrote it down. "And what does that organization do?" "Public Influence Consulting." Jin raised an eyebrow. "That's vague." "Because that's what they call themselves." "And what do they actually do?" The executive looked toward the window. "They manipulate narratives for powerful clients." RM's face hardened. "Political." "Corporate, sometimes both." "And they chose us." "Yes." Taehyung looked at the contract. "Because they wanted us to endorse something." "Yes." "Something we couldn't understand." "Yes." "And when I refused," the executive looked at him, "they decided to make you the example." Taehyung's eyes dropped. "So all of this happened because I said no." RM immediately turned toward him. "No." Taehyung looked up. "It happened because someone thought you would eventually say yes." "But I didn't." "Exactly." RM's voice softened. "That's why we're still standing." The executive suddenly pushed back his chair. "You need to leave." Suga looked at him. "Why?" "Because I just received another message." He turned his phone around. A single sentence was displayed. "Let them leave. The test is complete." Everyone stared. J-Hope whispered, "What test?" Nobody answered. Then another message appeared. "They chose each other." "Good." Taehyung felt a chill move through him. RM read the message twice. "This isn't over." Suga shook his head. "No." He looked at the 7 members. "But it is different now." "How?" Jungkook asked. Suga placed the photograph back on the table. "They expected us to turn against each other." Jimin looked at Taehyung. "We didn't." "And that's what they wanted to measure." RM slowly nodded. "Whether trust could survive pressure." Taehyung looked around the room at the 6 people beside him. The anger, fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty were still there. But beneath all of it was something stronger: choice. They had chosen each other despite every reason not to. Outside the building, the press waited. Cameras flashed the moment they emerged. Questions collided around them. Are BTS still together? Did Taehyung apologize? Is Jungkook leaving? What happened inside? RM stopped. The other 6 members stopped with him. He looked toward the cameras. For a moment, everyone expected a carefully prepared statement. Instead, RM said only, "We are still talking to each other. That matters more than any headline." A reporter shouted, "Are you afraid?" RM glanced at the 6 members. Taehyung was standing beside Jimin. Jungkook stood beside J-Hope. Jin and Suga flanked them. RM smiled faintly. Of course. The reporters became silent, but being afraid doesn't mean we stop choosing what we believe is right. Then he turned away. They walked toward the waiting vehicles together. Taehyung climbed into the van and sat beside Jungkook. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Jungkook quietly said, "I'm still angry." Taehyung nodded. "I know. I'm probably going to stay angry for a while. You have the right." Jungkook looked at him. "But I don't hate you." Taehyung's eyes became wet. "Thank you. Don't thank me." Jungkook looked out the window. "Just don't shut me out again." Taehyung nodded. "I won't." Across from them, Jimin watched quietly. RM sat in the front and looked back. Their eyes met. No one needed to say anything. The van moved through the evening traffic as Seoul's lights began to glow. The threat remained. The questions remained. The mystery remained. But the seven of them were together, and for the first time since the crisis began, Taehyung no longer felt as though he was carrying a secret alone. When they returned to the old house, Jin made tea again. J-Hope opened the windows to let the cool night air inside. Suga placed the evidence drive in a locked case. Jimin sat beside Taehyung on the floor. Jungkook brought 2 blankets from the bedroom and dropped one over Taehyung's shoulders without saying anything. Taehyung smiled. "Thanks." Jungkook shrugged. "Don't make it weird." Taehyung laughed softly. RM stood in the doorway watching them. He realized that nothing about the future was certain. The campaign could collapse. Their relationships with the company could change. Their careers could be damaged. The truth could become public in ways they couldn't control. But tonight, the 7 members were sitting together in an old house, eating instant noodles from mismatched bowls, arguing about who had stolen whose chopsticks, laughing despite everything. It wasn't victory. It wasn't safety. It wasn't even peace. It was something smaller and more important. It was trust being rebuilt in real time. Later, when the others had gone quiet, Taehyung stood alone by the window. The city shimmered below him. Jimin approached and stood beside him. "Can't sleep?" Jimin asked. "Not yet. Thinking. Too much." Jimin smiled. "Me too." They stood in silence. "Do you regret refusing?" Jimin finally asked. Taehyung thought for a long time. "I'm scared of what it will cost." "That's not what I asked." Taehyung smiled faintly. "No," Jimin nodded. "Then remember that." Taehyung looked at him. "Why?" "Because tomorrow someone will probably try to convince you that fear means you made the wrong choice." Taehyung's eyes softened. "And what if they succeed?" Jimin looked at him. "Then I'll remind you. What if you forget? Then someone else will." Taehyung laughed quietly. "There are 6 of you." "Exactly." Jimin rested his head briefly against the window. "You don't have to remember everything alone anymore." Taehyung looked out at the city again. For the first time that night, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. The darkness outside no longer felt like an enemy. It was simply darkness. And inside the house behind him were 6 familiar voices, 6 lives intertwined with his own, 6 people who had every reason to be angry but had chosen to stay. Taehyung closed his eyes and whispered, "I think I understand now." Jimin glanced at him. "Understand what? Why they were afraid of us." "Why?" Taehyung opened his eyes. "Because we can disagree and still remain together." Jimin smiled. "That might be the most dangerous thing about us." They stood there quietly until the first hint of dawn appeared beyond the buildings. No alarms sounded. No phones rang. No new threats appeared. For one brief morning, the world was silent. And in that silence, 7 exhausted hearts finally rested, not because the danger had disappeared, but because they had stopped allowing fear to decide who they were to each other. BTS prepares to expose a powerful conspiracy, but one final betrayal forces Taehyung to choose between protecting the truth and protecting someone he loves. "Tell me you didn't send it." RM stood motionless in the center of the room, staring at Suga as the laptop screen reflected cold light across both their faces. Nobody else spoke. It was nearly 2 in the morning, and the old house had once again become the center of a storm they could no longer pretend would pass. Suga slowly looked up from the screen. "I didn't." RM's eyes narrowed. "Then who did?" "I don't know. The file was sent from our secure archive." "I know, to 3 journalists, I know, and 1 international broadcaster." Suga closed the laptop. "I know." RM's voice rose. "Then how the hell did it happen?" The others appeared in the doorway one after another. Jimin was the first to see RM's expression. "What happened?" RM turned toward them. "The evidence was leaked." Taehyung froze. Jungkook stepped forward. What evidence? The payment records. J-Hope's face changed. All of them. Not all, Suga stood. Someone released enough to prove financial manipulation but not enough to identify the entire network. Jin frowned. That sounds deliberate. It is, Suga replied. Someone wants the public to see the fire without knowing who lit the match. Taehyung walked toward the laptop. Who received it? Suga showed him the list. Taehyung stared. These journalists are all known for investigative reporting, Suga said, which means someone wants this investigated. RM looked at him. Or someone wants us blamed. Exactly. Jimin crossed his arms. Could the leak make us look guilty? If presented incorrectly, Suga opened another file. Look, the payment records had been altered. Several entries now appeared to show payments made directly to shell companies connected to BTS-related projects. Jungkook's face went pale. That's fake. Yes. But someone could believe it. That's the point. RM walked closer. Can we prove the original version? Yes. How long? If nobody interferes, a few hours. Then we have to move. Taehyung suddenly spoke. No, everyone looked at him. What? RM asked. We shouldn't release anything yet. Jungkook frowned. Why? Taehyung looked at the screen. Because that's what they want. They want us to stay silent. No, he pointed at the altered files. They want us to react emotionally. They want us to release everything before we've verified it. Then they'll call us reckless, vindictive, unstable. Suga nodded slowly. He's right. RM looked at Taehyung. Then what do you suggest? Taehyung hesitated. We find the person who altered the files. J-Hope frowned. But how? They had to know which files mattered. Suga's eyes sharpened. Internal access. Yes. Again, Jin sighed. We keep coming back to the same place. RM looked toward the window. Maybe because the answer is there. Room fell silent. Then the doorbell rang. Everyone froze. Nobody moved. The old house had no visitors at this hour. The bell rang again, once, twice, 3 times. Jungkook whispered, "Who knows we're here?" Nobody answered. Suga immediately turned off the lights. "Stay quiet." The bell rang again. Then a voice came through the door. "It's me." Taehyung's face changed. "Minseok." RM looked at him. "You sure?" "Yes." Suga moved toward the door. "Don't open it yet." "Why?" "Because we don't know if he's alone." They waited, then Minseok spoke again. "I know you have the drives, I know the leak happened, and I know who altered the files." RM looked at Suga. Suga nodded once. RM opened the door. Minseok stepped inside wearing a dark jacket soaked by rain. His face looked exhausted. He carried a small case in one hand. "We don't have much time." RM closed the door. "Start talking." Minseok looked around the room. "Where is the staff member?" Taehyung answered. "Safe." "Good." "Why?" "Because if they know he's cooperating, he'll be the first person they remove." Jin frowned. "Remove?" Minseok looked at him. "That's the polite word." Silence. Jimin swallowed. "You mean kill?" Minseok didn't answer. His silence was enough. Taehyung stepped forward. "What did you find?" Minseok placed the case on the table. "The red triangle isn't a signature." Suga frowned. "Then what is it?" "A routing marker." "For what?" "Information." Minseok opened the case. Inside was a collection of drives and printed documents. Every time you saw that symbol, it marked information moving between separate systems. Suga leaned closer. "So the symbol identifies the transfer route." "Exactly." RM looked at the documents. "Can we trace it?" "I already did." He placed a sheet on the table. "The first route begins inside your company and ends." Minseok pointed to another location. "A private intelligence contractor." Jungkook's eyes narrowed. "Who hired them?" "That's the difficult part." "Why?" "Because the client is hidden behind 4 layers of companies." Suga looked at the records. Four. Can we break through them?" "Yes." "Then do it." Minseok shook his head. "Not like that." Suga looked irritated. "Why?" "Because there's another problem." "What?" Minseok looked at Taehyung. "The system has been collecting more than communication." Taehyung's face tightened. "What else?" "Biometric data." Nobody spoke. "Voice patterns. Facial recognition, movement analysis, emotional response indicators." Jimin whispered. "They were tracking our emotions." "Yes, how?" "Cameras, microphones, public footage, private recordings, interviews, rehearsals." J-Hope looked sick. "That's insane. It's surveillance." Minseok pointed at another document. "They weren't simply studying BTS." He paused. "They were building predictive profiles." RM's expression hardened. "Predicting what?" "How each of you would respond to specific pressure." Taehyung looked at the floor. "We already knew that." No, Minseok's voice became serious. You knew they profiled you individually. You don't know what they plan to do with those profiles. Suga stared at him. Tell us. Minseok took a breath. They planned a controlled public crisis. Jimin's eyes widened. What kind? A scandal. Jungkook's face went pale. About who? All of you. Jin shook his head. That's impossible. No. Minseok pulled out another file. They designed different scandals for each member. Nobody moved. RM would be portrayed as financially irresponsible. Jin would be accused of using the group for personal influence. Suga would be framed as secretly controlling business decisions. J-Hope would be accused of abandoning the group's interests. Jimin would be targeted with manipulated private conversations. Jungkook would be pushed into a narrative about leaving BTS. Then he looked at Taehyung. And you would be portrayed as unstable and unpredictable. Taehyung didn't move. His face became expressionless. Jimin immediately reached for his hand. Don't listen to this alone. Taehyung squeezed his fingers. Minseok continued. The purpose was not to destroy BTS completely. RM frowned. Then what? To weaken your ability to act collectively. Suga nodded slowly. Divide the decision-making. Exactly. And then, each member would be approached individually with a different offer. Jungkook laughed bitterly. They wanted to break us into 7 separate negotiations. Yes. RM looked at the documents. And the campaign. The campaign was the final stage. Meaning, if all 7 accepted, the crisis would never happen. And if one refused, the crisis would begin. Taehyung looked at him. So my refusal triggered it. Minseok shook his head. Your refusal accelerated it. What's the difference? The plan was designed to begin eventually. You simply exposed it earlier than they expected. RM looked at Taehyung. You didn't cause this. Taehyung nodded but didn't look convinced. Then Suga noticed something in the documents. Wait, he grabbed one page. This date. Minseok looked at him. What about it? This plan was created 2 years ago. Yes, Suga looked around the room. 2 years, Jin frowned. We've been targeted for 2 years, probably longer. Why? Because influence grows, Minseok said, and BTS became valuable beyond music. J-Hope shook his head. This isn't about music at all. No, Minseok closed the case. It never was. A phone rang. Everyone jumped. It was not one of theirs. Minseok reached into his pocket. It's mine. He looked at the screen and went pale. Who? RM asked. My daughter, he answered immediately. Hello, a small voice came through. Dad, Minseok's expression softened. Yes, I'm here. Are you coming home? He closed his eyes. Soon. Promise, promise. Then another voice appeared behind her. Minseok, his face changed. He stood immediately. Who is that? RM asked. Minseok's hand tightened around the phone. I don't know, the voice continued. You brought them the evidence. Minseok didn't answer. You were warned. Minseok's breathing became uneven. Leave my family alone. The voice laughed softly. Then stop helping them. The call ended. Minseok stared at the phone. Taehyung stepped closer. Where does your daughter live? Why? Because we need to protect her. No, Minseok shook his head. You can't. We can try. You don't understand. His voice broke. They don't threaten people. They make them disappear. The room fell silent. Jimin whispered, then we can't let you go alone. Minseok looked at him. You can't save everyone. Jimin replied, maybe not, but we're not going to stand here while someone threatens a child. Minseok looked at him for a long moment. Then he lowered his eyes. I knew you would say that. Why? Because that's exactly what they predicted. Jimin's expression hardened. Then let them predict wrong. Something shifted in Minseok's face. He looked at the 7 members and finally nodded. All right. RM immediately began planning. They would move Minseok's family to a secure location, preserve the evidence, and contact the independent attorney. But before they could leave, Suga stopped them. There's something else. Everyone turned. What? Suga held up a drive. This was hidden inside the cabinet. What is it? A personal archive. Whose? Suga looked at Taehyung. Yours. Taehyung's stomach tightened. Mine? Yes. Why? I don't know. Suga inserted the drive into an isolated computer. A single folder appeared. Inside were hundreds of audio files. Taehyung stared. Those are conversations. Yes. From when? Suga checked. Over 18 months. Taehyung's face went pale. 18 months. He sat down. Jimin crouched beside him. You don't have to listen. I do. No. If it's about me, I need to know. Suga opened the first file. Taehyung's voice filled the room. I don't think anyone understands how tired I am. Then another voice responded, "You're not supposed to tell them." Taehyung looked confused. "Who is that?" Minseok leaned toward the speaker. "That's not the consultant." "Then who?" the voice continued. "If they know how exhausted you are, they'll worry." Taehyung's eyes widened. "I remember this." Jimin looked at him. "When?" "During the world tour." Another file played. Taehyung's voice sounded frightened. "I don't want to do this anymore." A different voice replied, "You don't mean that." Taehyung whispered, "I was talking to someone." "Who?" He shook his head. "I don't remember." Another file, "Promise me you won't tell the others." Taehyung's face crumpled. "I said that." The room became silent. Jimin took his hand. "You were struggling." "But who was I talking to?" Suga continued through the files. The conversations became increasingly personal. Someone had spoken with Taehyung privately, repeatedly, apparently gaining his trust. The person had encouraged him to keep certain fears secret, had told him the others would misunderstand, had subtly convinced him that asking for help would burden the group. Then Suga played the final file. Taehyung's voice was barely audible. "I trust you." The other voice answered, "That's why you'll do what I ask." Taehyung's eyes widened. "Stop." Suga paused. "That's enough." Taehyung stood abruptly. "No, play it." "Taehyung, play it." Suga did. The voice continued. "When the time comes, you will refuse the campaign." Taehyung's recorded voice answered, confused. "Why?" "Because your refusal will make you the center of the story." "I don't understand." "You don't need to. What happens after? The others will protect you." Taehyung's voice became quieter. "And then they'll follow." The recording ended. Nobody spoke. Taehyung stared at the screen. "I was manipulated." Jimin's eyes filled with tears. "Yes. But I remember choosing to refuse." "You did choose." "Then what was mine?" Taehyung looked broken. "How much of my decision was actually mine?" RM stepped forward. "The decision was yours." "How do you know?" "Because when you saw the contract, you questioned it. When you discovered the truth, you told us. And when they tried to scare you, you still said no." Taehyung shook his head. "But someone planted the idea." "Maybe." RM crouched in front of him. "But planting an idea isn't controlling a person." Taehyung looked at him. "What if it is?" "Then all of us are vulnerable." "Exactly." RM held his gaze. "And that's why they failed." Taehyung frowned. "Why?" "Because they thought they could predict us." RM stood. "But they forgot one thing." "What?" "People change when they realize they're being manipulated." Jimin squeezed Taehyung's hand. "And we did." Suddenly Minseok's phone rang again. This time he didn't answer. A message appeared. "You have 10 minutes." Minseok stared at it. "We need to leave." They moved quickly. The evidence was divided among several secure drives. The members split into separate vehicles to avoid being tracked. Minseok went with RM and Suga. Taehyung rode with Jimin, Jungkook, Jin, and J-Hope. The city blurred outside the windows. Nobody spoke for several minutes. Then Jungkook said, "I hate this." Jin looked at him. "What?" "Not knowing who to trust." J-Hope sighed. "I know. What if we trusted the wrong people for years?" Nobody answered. Jimin looked at Taehyung. "Then we trust each other now." Taehyung stared out the window. "I keep thinking about that recording." "Don't." "I need to." "Why?" "Because someone knew exactly how to talk to me." Jimin's voice softened. "They studied you." "Yes." "That doesn't mean they knew you." Taehyung looked at him. Jimin continued, "They knew your habits, your fears, your reactions, but they didn't know your heart." Taehyung smiled faintly. "You sound certain." "I am." "Why?" "Because if they knew your heart, they would have known you'd eventually tell us." Taehyung looked down. "I almost didn't." "But you did." "Eventually." "Eventually" is still a choice. Vehicle turned onto a quiet road. Then the radio suddenly activated by itself. Static filled the car. Everyone froze. A voice came through. "Jimin." Jimin's face went white. "Turn it off." Jin reached for the controls. Nothing happened. The voice continued. "You were always the easiest to reach." Jimin stared at the radio. "How do they know we're here?" Jungkook grabbed his phone. "No signal." "Neither do I," J-Hope said. "Then how?" The voice laughed. "You keep asking the wrong question." Jimin closed his eyes. "What do you want?" The voice answered. "You." Taehyung immediately turned toward him. "No," the radio continued. "Not physically, emotionally." Jimin's breathing became shallow. "You want to know why your friends protect you? Stop." "Because they believe you hold them together." Jimin clenched his fists. "You're wrong." "Am I?" "Yes." "Then why does everyone look at you when they don't know what to say?" Jimin's eyes filled with tears. Taehyung reached for him. "Don't listen." "Why?" the voice asked. "Because it's true." Jimin shouted, "Shut up." The radio went silent. For several seconds there was only the sound of breathing. Then Jimin whispered, "I hate them." Taehyung held his hand. "I know. I hate that they know things about us. I know. I hate that they can make me doubt myself. I know," Jimin looked at him, "and I hate that part of me still wants to understand why." Taehyung nodded. "That's because you're human." Jimin wiped his eyes. "Sometimes I wish I wasn't." Taehyung squeezed his hand. "I don't." "Why? Because that's the part they can't control." The vehicle reached the safe location. RM and Suga were already there. Minseok's family arrived shortly afterward. The reunion was emotional. Minseok's daughter ran into his arms and he held her tightly, closing his eyes as if memorizing the feeling. Taehyung looked away, giving them privacy. Jimin stood beside him. "You okay?" "Yes, really." "No," Jimin smiled faintly. "Better answer." "I'm scared." "Me too. But I'm glad we're here." "Me too." Inside the safe house, the independent attorney arrived with a small team. The evidence was reviewed. Every original file was authenticated. The altered documents were compared against the originals. The financial records were verified. The recordings were analyzed. Slowly, the truth became undeniable. By sunrise, they had enough evidence to expose the entire operation, but RM refused to release it immediately. "We need one final piece." Suga looked at him. "What?" "Person who ordered it. We have the name, not enough." "Why?" "Because if we release everything except the person at the top, they'll sacrifice the middle and disappear." Suga nodded. "Then we need the direct connection." Minseok looked exhausted. "There is one way." Everyone turned toward him. "What?" "The original contract negotiation." "The first meeting?" "Yes." "Where?" "A private conference room." "Can we access the recording?" "Maybe." "How?" Minseok looked at Taehyung. "Because he was there." Taehyung stared at him. "I was unconscious for part of it." "Not unconscious." Minseok shook his head. "Sedated?" Jimin asked sharply. "No, manipulated." "How?" "They used a technique designed to overwhelm memory formation." Suga frowned. "That sounds dangerous." It was. "And the recording, the complete recording contains the order." RM's eyes hardened. "Then we find it." They traced the archive marker to a remote server. The server was protected by multiple layers. Suga worked for hours. At last he found a hidden directory. One file, one recording, date 18 months earlier. He played it. The room heard the consultant's voice. "Are you certain?" Another voice answered. "Yes." The voice was calm, powerful, familiar. "They must be approached individually." The consultant asked, "And if they refuse, then we create a crisis." "Which member first?" Taehyung. "Why him?" "Because he will feel responsible." Taehyung closed his eyes. The voice continued. "Once he refuses, the others will protect him. That gives us the emotional fracture." RM's fists clenched. The consultant asked, "And after the fracture?" The answer came slowly. "We offer each member a way out." "Individually, yes. And if they refuse again," a pause, "then we destroy their public trust." The recording continued for several minutes, revealing everything. The campaign, the profiling, the fabricated messages, the planned scandals, the internal access, the financial network. The ultimate objective, not to own BTS, not even to destroy BTS, to prove that public trust could be systematically manipulated. The final sentence was the one that silenced everyone. If BTS can be made to doubt itself, no audience will ever know what is real. The recording ended. Nobody spoke. Taehyung sat completely still. Then Jimin placed a hand on his back. "It's over." Taehyung shook his head. "Not yet." RM looked at him. "What do you mean?" "They wanted us to doubt each other." He looked around the room. "But we didn't." Jungkook nodded. "No," Jin smiled faintly. "We almost did." "Almost isn't enough," Suga said. J-Hope looked toward the evidence. "What happens now?" RM took a long breath. "We tell the truth." The attorney warned them about the consequences. The company would face questions. Executives would be investigated. The campaign would collapse. The public reaction would be enormous. There would be headlines accusing them of exaggeration, manipulation, greed, betrayal, and attention-seeking. Some people would believe them, some would not, but the evidence was strong. They could no longer remain silent. RM recorded the statement himself. He didn't use a teleprompter. The 6 members sat beside him. Taehyung sat at the end, hands clasped tightly. RM looked directly into the camera. "We are speaking today because private information was collected, manipulated, and used to pressure us into accepting decisions. We did not fully understand. We do not want revenge, we want transparency. Jin continued, we know there will be people who question us, that's fair. Suga said, we are releasing evidence because facts should not depend on who tells the story first. J-Hope looked into the camera. We also want to make something clear, the people involved tried to make us distrust each other. Jimin's voice softened. They failed. Jungkook continued, not because we never argued. He smiled faintly. We argued a lot. Jin laughed quietly, too much. The tension broke for a moment, then Taehyung looked into the camera. I was the first person to refuse the campaign. I thought I was protecting the group by keeping my fears to myself. I was wrong about that. His eyes became wet. But I was not wrong to say no. RM placed a hand on his shoulder. Taehyung continued. If someone tries to convince you that protecting people means controlling them, be careful. Sometimes real protection means telling the truth and allowing people to choose for themselves. The statement ended. They released the verified evidence through their legal representatives and independent journalists. The world reacted almost instantly. Headlines changed by the hour. Investigations began, companies issued statements, executives denied involvement, lawyers threatened lawsuits, commentators argued, fans defended them, critics attacked them. The story became global. But inside the safe house, the 7 members sat together without watching the news. They had said what they needed to say. The rest was no longer entirely in their hands. Taehyung sat outside beneath the morning sky. Jimin joined him, quiet now. Taehyung smiled, for the moment. How do you feel? Taehyung thought about it. Empty. Me too. Relieved. Me too. Sad. Jimin nodded. Me too. Taehyung looked at him. Do you think we'll ever trust people the same way again? Jimin shook his head. Taehyung looked surprised. Jimin smiled. We'll trust differently. How? More carefully. Taehyung laughed softly. That sounds less comforting. Maybe. Jimin looked toward the horizon. But trust isn't about never being betrayed, it's about knowing who you are when betrayal happens. Taehyung remained silent. Then he said, I thought losing control would destroy me. And it didn't. Why? Because I wasn't alone. Jimin smiled. Exactly. Behind them, the door opened. Jungkook leaned out. Jin says breakfast is ready. Taehyung smiled. Tell him we're coming. Jungkook disappeared inside. Jimin stood. Come on. Taehyung followed. Inside, Jin had prepared a ridiculous amount of food. J-Hope was arguing with Suga about coffee. RM was finally laughing without looking exhausted. Jungkook was stealing pieces of fruit. The room felt almost ordinary again. Taehyung sat down. Jin pushed a plate toward him. Eat. Taehyung smiled. Yes, Hyung. Jungkook looked at him. You seem different. Quieter. Taehyung thought for a moment. Maybe I'm tired of being afraid of every silence. Jungkook nodded. That's good. Suga looked up from his coffee. Don't get too comfortable. Everyone groaned. Why? J-Hope asked. Because recovery takes time. Jin laughed. You really know how to ruin breakfast. Suga smiled. Someone has to. RM looked around the table. He's right, though. Everyone became quiet. This isn't the end of what happened, RM continued. There will be consequences. Some people will try to rewrite the story. Some will try to make us regret speaking. He paused. But we don't have to spend the rest of our lives fighting them. Jimin nodded. Then what do we do? RM smiled. Live. Jin raised his cup. Finally, J-Hope lifted his cup. To living. Suga raised his. To surviving. Jungkook raised his. To not trusting mysterious consultants. Everyone laughed. Taehyung raised his cup last. To choosing each other. They touched their cups together. The sound was small, almost insignificant, yet it carried everything they had survived. Months of manipulation, fear, anger, doubt, betrayal, the temptation to turn against one another, the temptation to run. They had lost some innocence along the way. They would never forget what happened, but they had gained something too, a deeper understanding of what it meant to choose one another freely. Later that evening, the safe house became quiet. One by one, the members disappeared into their rooms. Taehyung remained awake for a while, sitting by the window. His phone was silent, no strange messages, no hidden recordings, no threats, just silence. He looked at the screen and smiled. Jimin appeared in the doorway, still awake, a little, thinking, not this time. Jimin raised an eyebrow. Then what are you doing? Taehyung looked at the dark screen. Nothing. Jimin smiled. Good. He sat beside him. They watched the city lights together. After several minutes, Taehyung whispered, thank you. Jimin didn't ask what for. You're welcome. Taehyung leaned his head against the wall. I don't know what tomorrow looks like. Neither do I, that's okay. Yeah. The silence between them felt different now. It wasn't threatening, it wasn't hiding anything, it was simply silence. Behind them, laughter suddenly erupted from the hallway. Jin shouted something about stolen food. Jungkook shouted back. J-Hope laughed. Suga complained. RM tried to calm everyone down and failed. Taehyung smiled. Jimin laughed quietly. They're impossible. They are. But Taehyung looked toward the hallway. I'd choose them again. Jimin nodded. So would I. They stayed there until the night became deep and quiet. The world outside continued arguing about what BTS had revealed. Some believed them, some questioned them. Investigations would continue. Legal battles would follow. Their relationship with the company would change. Their careers might enter a new chapter none of them had planned. But for the first time, none of that felt like something they needed to solve before sleeping. They had spoken, they had listened, they had confronted the truth, and they had remained together. Taehyung finally stood. Let's go. Jimin followed him down the hallway. At the end of it, all 6 members were gathered around the kitchen table again, arguing about who had finished the last bowl of noodles. Taehyung laughed. You guys never change. Jin pointed at him. That's exactly why you're staying. Taehyung smiled. I wasn't planning to leave. Jungkook grinned. Good. RM looked at all 7 of them. No speech was necessary, no dramatic promise. They simply sat together until the night became morning. And when the first sunlight entered through the windows, Taehyung realized that the greatest victory had never been exposing the people who tried to control them. It had been discovering that despite fear, manipulation, pressure, and betrayal, the 7 of them still possessed the one thing no contract could own and no strategist could predict, the freedom to choose one another. For the first time in months, Taehyung closed his eyes without wondering whether someone was listening. Jimin sat nearby. Jungkook was asleep on the couch. Jin had left a blanket over him. J-Hope was quietly cleaning the kitchen. Suga was already awake with coffee. RM stood by the window watching the sunrise. Nothing was perfect. Nothing was guaranteed. But the room was warm, the doors were locked, and the people he loved were there. Taehyung breathed in slowly. Then he smiled. We're okay, he whispered. RM heard him from across the room. He turned and smiled. Yeah. Taehyung looked around once more. We're really okay. This time nobody corrected him, nobody warned him, nobody asked what came next. They simply let the words remain exactly as they were. We're okay. And for that morning it was enough. BTS thought the conspiracy was over until a shocking confession reveals that the greatest secret was hidden inside their own victory. You celebrated too early. The words appeared on RM's phone at 6:42 in the morning, just as the first sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor. He stared at the message without blinking. There was no number attached, no profile picture, no indication of how it had reached him, only 7 words. You celebrated too early. RM slowly lowered his coffee. Across the table, Suga noticed the change in his expression. What? RM turned the phone around. Suga read the message once, then again. His eyes narrowed. Don't answer. I wasn't planning to. Show me the metadata. RM handed him the phone. Suga connected it to his laptop. Within seconds, his relaxed posture disappeared. That's strange. What? The message wasn't sent through a normal network. RM leaned closer. Then how? It was injected directly into the device. Meaning, someone had access to your phone at the system level. RM's face hardened. That can't be possible. Apparently it is. The sound of footsteps came from the hallway. Jimin appeared first, still half asleep, followed by Jungkook, Jin, J-Hope, and Taehyung. Jungkook looked from RM to Suga. Why do you both look like someone died? Jin frowned. Don't say things like that before breakfast. RM stood. We received another message. Taehyung immediately became alert. From them? We don't know. Suga turned the laptop around. But whoever sent it bypassed the phone's normal security. Jimin's face tightened. What did it say? RM hesitated. You celebrated too early. Silence settled over the kitchen. Jungkook's jaw tightened. They're still watching us. Suga shook his head. Not necessarily. Then what? It could be someone trying to make us think they're still watching. Taehyung looked at him. You mean psychological warfare? Exactly. Jin pulled out a chair. Can we have one morning without a conspiracy? J-Hope sighed. Apparently not. Taehyung walked toward the window. The city looked peaceful below them. People were starting their mornings, cars moving through intersections, cafes opening their doors. Nothing about the world suggested that their lives had been turned upside down. What if they never stopped? Taehyung asked. RM looked at him. Who? Everyone involved. We exposed them. Some of them. Taehyung turned. We still don't know how far the network goes. Suga nodded. That's the problem. Then we keep investigating. Jungkook frowned. Didn't we just agree to live? Taehyung smiled faintly. We did. Then why are we investigating again? Because someone just told us we celebrated too early. Jungkook stared at him. Fair. Jimin walked over to Taehyung. Are you scared? Taehyung didn't answer immediately. A little. Jimin nodded. Me too. But I'm not going to let them decide what I do with that fear. Jimin smiled. Good. Suga suddenly looked up. Wait, everyone turned. What? He stared at the screen. The message contained something. What? A timestamp. RM frowned. 6:42. That's when it arrived. No, Suga enlarged the data. Look at the internal timestamp. RM leaned closer. 3:17. Taehyung's expression changed. The same time as the first recording. Exactly. J-Hope whispered, that's not coincidence. Suga shook his head. Probably not. Then what does it mean? I don't know yet. Can you find out? Suga looked at the 7 of them. Yes. He began typing. The room became quiet again, then his screen flashed. A new folder appeared. Nobody had touched the computer. What the hell? Jungkook whispered. Suga stared at it. The folder contained one file. Its name was simply 7. RM's voice dropped. Don't open it. Suga didn't. Instead, he isolated the computer from every network. Now, he clicked. A video appeared. The image showed the same old headquarters they had visited, but the timestamp was yesterday. The camera moved through an empty corridor. It reached the archive room. The door opened. Someone entered. The face was hidden by darkness. The person walked toward the cabinet where the evidence had been stored. They opened it. Empty. Then they turned toward the camera. The screen suddenly went black. A sentence appeared. You didn't find the archive. You found the bait. Nobody moved. Jin whispered no. Suga replayed it, the same thing, the same sentence. Jimin's voice was barely audible. What does that mean? Suga leaned back. It means the drives we found may not have been the real archive. RM's face hardened. Then what did we find? A decoy. Taehyung stared at the screen, but the evidence was real. Yes. The financial records were real. Yes. The recordings were real. Yes. Then why call it bait? Suga looked at him, because they wanted us to find it. Jungkook slammed his palm against the table. So everything we exposed was something they wanted exposed, possibly. Then we played right into their hands. RM immediately shook his head. No, how do you know? Because the evidence still proved wrongdoing. But what if they wanted the network exposed? Why would they? Jungkook asked. To remove the people who became liabilities. Suga nodded slowly. Exactly. Everyone looked at him. Think about it, Suga continued. The people we exposed weren't necessarily the people at the top. They may have been disposable. J-Hope's face fell. They sacrificed their own people. Maybe. That's terrifying. Yes. RM walked toward the window. Then the question isn't whether the evidence was fake. He turned. It's why they wanted us to find it. Taehyung's eyes narrowed. To make us believe we won. Exactly. The room became unbearably quiet. Jimin finally spoke. Then what is the real archive? Suga looked at the screen. I don't know. Where could it be? Somewhere we haven't looked. Jin sighed. That's not very helpful. I know. Taehyung suddenly remembered something. Wait. Everyone looked at him. The consultant. What about him? RM asked. Before we found the archive, he told us something. What? He said the people behind the campaign weren't interested in owning BTS. We know. No. Taehyung shook his head. He said something else. Jimin watched him carefully. What? He said, they need you to remain valuable. Suga's eyes widened. That's important. Why? Jungkook asked. Because if their objective were simply to destroy BTS, they wouldn't need to preserve your value. RM understood immediately. They need the group intact. For what? J-Hope asked. Suga stood. Influence. That's too broad. Then money. Still too broad. Suga looked toward the laptop. Or access. RM frowned. Access to what? Markets. Audiences, governments, corporate networks, cultural influence. Jin stared at him. You're saying BTS was being used as leverage? Possibly, Taehyung whispered. Then the campaign wasn't about controlling us. Suga looked at him. It was about controlling what our existence could influence. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Jungkook asked, "How do we find out?" RM answered, "We follow the money." Suga nodded. "That's exactly what I was thinking." They spent the next 6 hours tracing financial transfers connected to the companies exposed in the first investigation. What they found was stranger than expected. The shell companies weren't simply receiving money. They were moving it through foundations, consulting groups, investment firms, and media organizations. Some of the transactions were tiny. Others were enormous, but all of them converged around the same dates: major BTS announcements, tour, partnerships, public appearances, and international events. J-Hope stared at the spreadsheet. "They're timing everything." "Yes," Suga said. "But why?" Jin leaned over the table. "Maybe market manipulation." "Not exactly." "Then what?" "Narrative manipulation." RM looked at him. "Explain." Suga pointed at the dates. Whenever BTS's public influence increased, certain investments changed position. Media coverage shifted, corporate announcements followed. It isn't about one company. It's an ecosystem. Exactly. Taehyung sat silently. Jimin noticed. "What are you thinking? That we may have been surrounded by this for years?" "Maybe. And we never noticed." Jimin shook his head. "We noticed things, we just didn't know what they meant." Taehyung looked at him. "Does that make you feel better?" "Not really," he smiled. "But it makes me feel less guilty." Taehyung smiled back. Then the front door opened. Everyone turned. The senior staff member they had rescued entered with the attorney. His face was pale. "We need to talk." RM stood. "About what?" The man looked at the laptop. "You found the second layer." Suga's eyes narrowed. "You knew." "I suspected." "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because I didn't know if I could trust the evidence." Jungkook stepped forward. "You keep saying that, because it's true. We almost died because people kept deciding what we were allowed to know." The man's face tightened. "I know." "Then stop hiding things." RM held up a hand. "Jungkook." Jungkook stepped back but didn't look away. RM turned to the staff member. "Tell us everything." The man sat down. "The network isn't just one organization." "We know." "No." "You don't." He opened a folder. "There are 3 levels." Suga leaned forward. 3. Public-facing organizations, private contractors, and the core. "Who is the core?" "I never saw them directly." Taehyung frowned. "Then how do you know they exist?" "Because every instruction came from above the contractors." "Through whom?" "A system." Suga's expression changed. "An automated system, partially." "That's impossible." "No." The man looked at him. "They built an intelligence platform that analyzes influence networks." RM frowned. "AI? Something more sophisticated." Suga stared at him. "Predictive modeling." "Yes," Jimin whispered. "They used a machine to predict us." "Not just you." The man looked around the room. "Millions of people." Silence. "They use celebrities, politicians, corporations, media, social platforms, financial markets. They model how information spreads and how people react." Jin shook his head. "This sounds like a movie." "I wish it were." Suga took the folder. "What is the system called?" The man hesitated. "Orpheus." The word seemed to change the atmosphere. "Why?" RM asked. "Because the people who created it believe human behavior can be mapped." Taehyung whispered. "And they mapped us." "Yes." Jimin looked at the folder. "How do we destroy it?" The man shook his head. "You don't." "Then what do we do?" "You expose it." Suga frowned. "Where is the server?" "Unknown." "You must know something." "Only the network architecture." "Then show me." The man handed him another drive. "This contains everything I could retrieve." Suga plugged it in. The screen displayed a map. Hundreds of nodes appeared across the world. Then 7 points illuminated, 1 for each member, but there was an 8th point. RM frowned. "What's that?" The man looked at it, his face drained of color. "I don't know." "You don't know?" "No." Suga zoomed in. "The 8th point was located in Seoul." "That's impossible." "Why?" "Because that node didn't exist in the previous model." "Then what is it?" The screen updated. A label appeared. Active subject. Everyone froze. Taehyung whispered, "Subject." Suga enlarged the profile. There was no photograph, no name, only a code, T08. Jungkook looked at Taehyung. "Could it be you?" Taehyung shook his head. "No, I'm T07 in their old files." Jimin's face went pale. "Then who is T08? The system suddenly displayed a message. T08 has been observing the 7 for 1421 days. RM's voice dropped. 4 years. Suga stared at the screen. "Almost exactly." J-Hope whispered, "Someone has been observing us for 4 years." Yes, Jin asked. Who? The screen flashed again. Identity WITHHELD. Of course, Jin muttered. Taehyung stood. We need to find them. RM shook his head. Not yet. Why? 'Cause if this person has been observing us for 4 years, they may already know we're looking. Jimin looked at the screen. Then we don't search for them. Suga looked up. What do? We make them come to us. Jungkook frowned. How? RM looked at Taehyung. We give them something they can't ignore. Taehyung understood. A false lead. Suga smiled slightly. Now you're thinking. They created a controlled piece of information suggesting that the 7 members had discovered a hidden financial account. Only 3 people would receive it. The attorney, the senior staff member, and 1 journalist they trusted. The information was false. If it appeared anywhere else, they would know the network had access. They waited. 12 hours passed. Nothing happened. 24 hours, still nothing. On the second night, Jimin fell asleep on the couch. Jungkook was reading. Jin was cooking. J-Hope was watching television without paying attention. Taehyung sat beside the window. RM and Suga were still working. Then Suga's laptop beeped. He froze. We have movement. RM stood. Where? Suga showed him. The false account appeared in a private database. Whose? Unknown. Can you trace it? Yes. His fingers moved quickly. It's coming from. He stopped. What? Our own building. RM's face changed. That's impossible. No. Suga zoomed in. Not just the building, he pointed. The signal is coming from inside this house. Everyone woke instantly. Jungkook stood. What? Jimin opened his eyes. What happened? RM raised a hand. Nobody move. Suga looked at the system. The signal is inside. Jin whispered, we've checked this place. Apparently not well enough. They searched every room, under tables, behind furniture, inside cabinets, nothing. And Taehyung stopped in the hallway. Wait. He looked at the wall. What? Jimin asked. There. A tiny red light blinked beneath the smoke detector. Suga immediately moved toward it. Don't touch it. He examined the device. This isn't a smoke detector. Jungkook stared. Then what is it? A relay. How long has it been there? I don't know. Taehyung looked at the device. Someone installed it before we came here. RM's jaw tightened. Can you extract the data? Suga nodded. Give me 10 minutes. 10 minutes became 30, then an hour. Finally, Suga found a recording archive, audio files, thousands of them. The earliest dated 3 years and 11 months earlier. Everyone went silent. Jin whispered, they were listening to us here. Yes, Jimin looked horrified, even when we slept. Some recordings indicate continuous monitoring. Jungkook stepped away from the wall. I can't breathe. J-Hope put an arm around him. Come outside. No, Jungkook shook his head. I want to hear it. You don't need to. I need to know. Suga opened the earliest file. The recording began with ordinary conversation, then a younger version of Taehyung laughed. Jin was talking about food, J-Hope was singing, RM was discussing lyrics. Jimin was teasing Jungkook. Suga listened quietly. Then a voice appeared, not one of the members. They're closer than expected. Another voice answered. That's why they're useful. Taehyung's eyes widened. That voice. What? Jimin asked. I've heard it before. Suga paused the recording. Where? Taehyung shook his head. I don't know. Think. Taehyung closed his eyes. He remembered interviews, meetings, airports, practice rooms, 100 faces, 100 voices. Then his expression changed. No, Jimin grabbed his arm. What? It can't be. RM looked at him. Who? Taehyung whispered a name. The room went completely still. It was someone they had never suspected. Someone who had been publicly defending them during the scandal. Someone who had spoken against the leaked documents. Someone who had even criticized the company for failing to protect them. Jungkook stared at Taehyung. You're saying that person was involved. I don't know. You just said you recognized the voice. I did. Then who? Taehyung finally said the name. Jimin's face drained of color. Jin covered his mouth. J-Hope stepped backward. RM stared at the floor. Suga didn't move at all. That's impossible, Jungkook whispered. Why? Because he helped us. That's what makes it worse, Suga replied. They listened to another recording, the same voice. Another, the same, then a fourth. The pattern was undeniable. This person had been present from the beginning, not as an enemy, as an ally, someone who had protected them from smaller threats while quietly feeding information into the larger system. Jimin's voice trembled. How could we not see it? RM answered, because that's how infiltration works. I trusted him. So did I defended him. So did all of us. Taehyung looked at the floor. I think he knew that. Jungkook suddenly slammed his fist against the wall. I hate this, Jimin turned toward him. Jungkook, I hate that every time we think we've found the truth, there's another layer. I know. How many people have been lying to us? Nobody answered. How many? Jungkook shouted. Tell me, RM stepped toward him. We don't know. Exactly. Jungkook's eyes filled with tears. That's the worst part. Taehyung approached him. We're still here. That doesn't make it okay. No, I don't want another person to tell us they betrayed us because they were protecting us. Taehyung nodded. Neither do I. Jungkook looked at him. Promise me something. What? If you ever think you're protecting me by hiding something, don't. Taehyung's expression softened. I promise. Jimin joined them. Same. Jin raised his hand. Me too. J-Hope smiled sadly. Absolutely. Suga nodded. Agreed. RM looked at all 6 members. That's the rule. They returned to the evidence. The person they suspected had been connected to Orpheus for years, but they still needed proof. Suga discovered encrypted messages between the person and an unknown administrator. The messages referenced the 7, the refusal, and the final fracture. One message was dated 3 weeks before Taehyung rejected the campaign. It read, T07 will resist. Use his guilt. Another read, Jimin will stabilize the group. Isolate him emotionally. Another, Jungkook will challenge the narrative, give him a reason to doubt his own judgment. RM read the messages in silence. Then he closed the laptop. That's enough. Suga shook his head. We need more. We have enough to know, not enough to act. Then what? We confront him. Jin frowned. Directly? Yes, that's dangerous. So is letting him know we're suspicious. Taehyung looked at RM. I'll talk to him. Everyone immediately objected. No, Jimin said. Absolutely not. Jungkook shook his head. Not alone. I won't be alone. Taehyung looked around the room. We'll all be there. RM thought about it. Fine. The confrontation was arranged for the following evening at a private office. The man arrived calmly. He smiled when he saw them. I was wondering when you'd call. RM studied him. You knew, I suspected. About what? That you had found something. Suga placed a drive on the table. Do you recognize this? The man's smile disappeared. No. Lie. Face hardened. Careful. Suga leaned forward. We've spent weeks being careful. The man looked at Taehyung. Is this what you wanted? Taehyung's eyes were cold. I wanted the truth. You already have it. No. Taehyung pushed the drive toward him. We have your voice. The man stared at it. Nobody spoke. Finally, he sighed. You were never supposed to find that. Jungkook stood. Why? Because you weren't supposed to look. You monitored us. Yes. For years. Yes. Jimin's voice cracked. Why? The man looked at him. Because you were becoming more powerful than anyone expected. That's not an answer. It is. No, Jimin said. It's an excuse. The man looked away. You don't understand what influence means. RM's voice sharpened. Then explain it. BTS became a global behavioral phenomenon. Jin scoffed. We're musicians. You were musicians. The man leaned forward. Then you became something else. What? A symbol. Taehyung stared at him. And you wanted to control the symbol. No. Then what? We wanted to understand it. Suga laughed bitterly. You don't spend 4 years secretly recording people because you're curious. The man's face tightened. We needed data. For what? Prediction. Prediction of what? Public reaction. RM's eyes narrowed. You used us as a test subject. Yes, silence. Taehyung's voice became dangerously quiet. And the campaign, a stress test. Jimin stood abruptly. You destroyed our trust for a stress test. It was controlled. Controlled, Jimin laughed in disbelief. You made us believe people we loved were betraying us. You survived. That's your defense. Yes, Taehyung stepped forward. You don't get to decide what survival means for us. The man looked at him. You think I'm the villain, aren't you? No. Then who is? The man smiled sadly. That's the problem. He looked at the 7 members. You still think there is one person behind everything. Suga's expression changed. There isn't. And shook his head. Orpheus doesn't have a single master. RM stared at him. Then who controls it? Everyone who benefits from its predictions. J-Hope whispered, that's impossible. No, the man stood. That's the truth. He pulled out a small drive and placed it on the table. This contains the real architecture. Suga immediately reached for it. Why give it to us? The man looked at Taehyung. Because you finally asked the right question. Which is? Not who is controlling us. He paused. Benefits when we are controlled. Nobody answered. The man walked toward the door. RM stopped him. You're not leaving. The man turned. You can't hold me. Maybe not. Then why? RM's voice was quiet. Because I want you to hear this. The man waited. We are not your experiment anymore. Taehyung stepped beside RM. We're not your data. Jimin joined them. We're not your prediction. Jungkook stood next to them. We're not your asset. Jin crossed his arms. We're not your market. J-Hope smiled sadly. We're people. Suga looked directly at the man. And people are unpredictable. The man's expression changed. For the first time he looked afraid. That's exactly what scares them. He left. The 7 members remained in silence. Suga opened the drive. The architecture appeared. Orpheus wasn't controlled by one organization. It was a decentralized network used by dozens of institutions. Some knew what they were doing. Others only purchased predictions without knowing their source. Some were governments, some were corporations, some were media organizations, some were investment firms. The network had grown beyond its creators. It had become an ecosystem feeding on data. RM stared at the screen. How do we fight something like this? Suga answered quietly. We don't fight the whole world. Then, we make the information impossible to hide. Jimin nodded. Transparency. Exactly. Taehyung looked at the map. But there will always be another network. Probably. Another system. Probably. Another person trying to control us. RM smiled faintly. Probably. Taehyung sighed. That's depressing. Jin laughed softly. Welcome to adulthood. Everyone laughed despite themselves. The tension eased. They didn't know how the next chapter would unfold. They didn't know how many people would believe them. They didn't know whether Orpheus could ever truly be dismantled. But they knew one thing now. They would no longer allow fear to make their decisions for them. Months later, the investigation would continue through courts, journalists, regulators, and independent researchers. Some institutions would deny involvement. Others would cooperate. Some relationships would never recover. Some people would apologize. Others would disappear from public life. The 7 members would face criticism, exhaustion, and endless questions. But the most important change happened quietly. They stopped asking whether they could trust everyone. Instead, they learned to trust their ability to recognize when something felt wrong and to speak about it before fear turned into silence. One evening, long after the worst of the scandal had passed, the 7 sat together on the rooftop. The city glittered beneath them. Jin had brought food. J-Hope had brought music. Jungkook had brought a blanket. Suga had brought nothing but coffee. RM looked around. We're still here. Taehyung smiled. Again, Jimin laughed. You really like saying that? 'Cause I keep needing to remind myself. Jungkook looked at him. You don't have to. Taehyung raised an eyebrow. Why? Because we'll remind you. Jin lifted his cup to reminding each other. J-Hope lifted his to surviving. Suga lifted his to questioning everything. RM smiled. Within reason, everyone laughed. Jimin looked at the city. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't found out? Taehyung answered quietly. Sometimes. And I think we would have kept going. Probably. But maybe we would have been less honest with ourselves. Jimin nodded. Maybe. Jungkook looked at the others. I think the strangest thing is that I don't regret knowing. Jin smiled. Even after everything. Suga looked at him. Why? Jungkook shrugged. Because now I know that fear doesn't always mean stop. Taehyung smiled. Sometimes it means pay attention. RM nodded. Exactly. The wind moved gently across the rooftop. For a while, nobody spoke. There were no alarms, no mysterious messages, no hidden cameras discovered beneath the walls. No voices coming through speakers at 3 in the morning, just the sound of the city and the laughter of 7 people who had learned painfully that trust was not the absence of betrayal. Trust was the courage to remain honest even after betrayal had taught you to be afraid. Taehyung leaned back and looked at the stars. You know what I want? Jimin looked at him. What? A boring day. Jin laughed. Impossible. A completely boring day. J-Hope smiled. No scandals. No secrets. Jungkook added, no mysterious drives. Suga raised his coffee. No hidden networks. RM smiled. No investigations. Jimin laughed. Just us. Taehyung nodded. Just us. They stayed together until the night grew cold. Eventually, they went downstairs one by one. Taehyung was the last to leave the rooftop. He looked once more at the city. Somewhere out there, Orpheus still existed. The network might never completely disappear. There would always be people who wanted to predict others, control narratives, manipulate fear, or turn human lives into numbers. But Taehyung no longer felt powerless before that possibility. He had learned something more important than how to defeat an enemy. He had learned that his voice mattered before anyone gave him permission to use it. He opened the rooftop door. Jimin was waiting in the hallway. "You coming?" Taehyung smiled. "Yeah." They walked downstairs together. In the kitchen, Jungkook was arguing with Jin about dessert. J-Hope was laughing. RM was pretending not to listen. Suga was drinking coffee. It was noisy, messy, ordinary, beautifully ordinary. Taehyung stopped for a moment and watched them. Then Jimin nudged him. "What?" Taehyung smiled. "Nothing. You're doing that again." "Doing what?" "Looking at us like you're afraid we'll disappear." Taehyung's smile softened. "Maybe I just like knowing you're here." Jimin looked at him for a moment, then smiled. "We're here," Taehyung nodded. "I know." They entered the kitchen. Jin immediately handed Taehyung a plate. "Eat." Taehyung laughed. "You always say that, because you never listen." "I listen." "You pretend to listen." Jungkook laughed. "He's right." Taehyung shook his head. "Unbelievable." RM watched them from across the room and smiled. The crisis had changed them. It had taken away illusions they once believed would last forever. But it had also given them something stronger. The willingness to question, to communicate, to forgive carefully, and to choose each other without pretending betrayal could never happen again. The future remained uncertain. The world remained complicated. And somewhere beyond the city lights, powerful systems continued predicting human behavior. But 7 people sat around a kitchen table, laughing over stolen dessert, arguing about nothing important, and refusing to become numbers in someone else's equation. For tonight, that was enough.